team, welcome to 10 Talk. So another season for us that's going to be all about you winning your well-being. And we want to go into a deeper look at really what is well-being, how do we win it? And we're teaming up with Dr. Mark Allen in regards to really understanding the science behind wanting to win in our life, in our sport, in our business. And most importantly, how in the world do we do it? That is what matters. This is very personal, this journey about well-being, and we are on your support team to really equip you with some great information and help you to navigate through the change. So, Dr. Allen, welcome and thank you for being on our support team. It is a 10 moment for us to welcome you to our team.
Thanks so much, Carlette. I really appreciate it. I've been very impressed with what you've put out there so far, and I really appreciate the opportunity to help out.
Well, we're going to start with the power of your story. As we're welcoming you to our team, we want our team and our world to be able to hear really the power of your story.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Mark. I'm a child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist. I also have a subspecialty in the sports world. I live in Denver, Colorado, but I've lived all over the place from Maine to New Zealand, Texas, you name it. But we ended up settling here a few years ago. Day to day, my practice is that I'll see kids of all ages, adolescents to elite athletes as well. Kind of my sweet spot ages is between 15 to 25, kind of the developmental transition stage in lots of people's lives. But I really focus on a holistic perspective on helping people. So, psychiatry is a little bit of a loaded word. Really, I like to think of it as more helping with mental health. So when I meet someone, I try to figure out the biological, psychological, and social drivers behind recovery. And because I mostly work with young people, I don't just treat adolescents in a vacuum. I'm really working with their family system. And so we're talking about athletics and sport today. And really, if you think about the entourage that goes around, especially an elite athlete, it's big. And so you want to make sure that everybody that's involved in the athlete's life understands what's going on, and so that how you can help them and support them.
We're really going to call that the power of team. We really believe in that. We live by it. And so always making sure that our support team is equipped with the right information, how to support us. We know they're anchored in love. We all have our own opinions of what we think all of us should be doing. And what a gift to really get a playbook on how to do this in a way that is aligned with both mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, just all of those components. So today's conversation is all about eating disorders inside sport. And I would just add inside high achievers, because so many times that's about going for greatness and really wanting to understand how to get our body to produce at the highest level. And thank you for just starting with the power of well-being and understanding how do we win this eating disorder, understanding the triggers. Just take us into a bit of information about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So eating disorders can affect everyone. They're not limited to certain parts of the population, literally anyone. A lot of times it used to be thought of as more of a female illness. And in fact, as time has changed and people have started to actually report, because underreporting has been a big issue, we found that it really can affect all sexes and all genders. As far as an approach and like the well-being approach, as you were mentioning, it's really two-pronged. One is education, which is why we're having this talk, and two is really focusing more on the treatment aspect. Once you recognize that someone is struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, focusing on the why at the time of their actually suffering is so less important than the treatment and getting them help, because it's a distractor. So, for example, say I'm working with an adolescent who is struggling with anorexia or nervosa, the most deadly of all mental illnesses that exist. You have to really work with the family and kind of externalize the eating disorder from the person, because it can otherwise be a very frustrating situation for the family that they think their kid is wanting to not eat for them. And so in order to say, hey, this eating disorder is an unwanted guest in your house, or even giving it a name like Ed or something like that, you start a relationship with everybody's working together, including the patient or the young person, against the eating disorder. So within the realm of, sport, you'd also want to make sure the coach is on board and understands what's going on. And so I use a family-based model, especially with my young people, where it's all about weight restoration. Their medications are unhelpful. This food is medicine, nutrition, making sure everything's on board. And so you want to get a dietitian to help as well, coming up with a meal plan. But taking a step back, we have to make sure you have a good medical evaluation and making sure you're triaging how sick the person is in order to get them the correct help at the time.
So,
Is that a
so
good
when,
start?
yeah, beautiful. Thank you for just sharing that. And I respect the medical context of it, which you're going to be a great champion for us on. I'd like to go to the emotional side to understand just what is happening when you talk about this disorder. What is it and what's happening and how does it come into our lives?
So again, focusing on the why is a little hard. That being said, there are genetic drivers behind eating disorders for sure, and they affect upwards of 5 to 9% of the general population. Within the realm of athletics, it's much higher, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But there are 4, but really 3 primary categories. I like thinking about it like that versus labels.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your restrictive eaters, you have the folks that are overeating or binging, and you have the cyclical eating disorders or disordered eating patterns that can erupt. Very important to distinguish between disordered eating and a full-blown eating disorder, because disordered eating symptoms can kind of just hang out in the environment. They could be basically maladaptive ways of coping with stress. So that's a really good way of thinking about it. Within the restrictive category, you have anorexia nervosa and something called ARFID, or avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Those are the 2 primary categories. Think about it this way. Someone's not getting in enough nutrition. It's very much a math equation. And as a result, it's causing all kinds of physical symptoms to develop, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the difference between the 2 is the cognition, the drive for thinness. The person with anorexia has that eating disorder voice chipping at them, telling them to not eat or to use XYZ behavior. The person with avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or ARFID, which is a new diagnosis, there's no voice, or at least we don't think that there's a voice. They just struggle with getting nutrition in. 10% of the time, though, as you start to weight restore the person, we find that it was anorexia all along. Anyway, second category, the overeaters.
Okay.
Binge eating. It's when someone is eating much more than anybody would agree is normal at one specific time. And this needs to happen at least once a week for a certain period of time, usually 3 months. But it's also associated with a lot of shame and guilt from that, and can be the result of a hole in their life or anxiety or something that they're trying to get under control. So if we learn nothing else today, eating disorders are not about food. They're about control. So it is a means of gaining control. So you have the binge eaters are doing that. Overeating is a means of that. Then you have the cyclical pattern, which is those that are using a binge eating with a compensatory behavior. Notice the way I'm phrasing that. It's not just restriction. It could be other ways of eliminating calories. Again, math equation, in and out. It could be over-exercise. It could be using a diuretic or a laxative. It could be restricting how much they take in. So there's these 3 categories: restriction, binging, and the cyclical, that if you frame it that way, it's a lot easier to communicate versus using these gobbledygook labels that these folks put on.
Well, so I totally respect the why is, a lot of information. And I want us to focus on really the what and the how, so that we feel like we, like you said, are getting educated and can really get some new hope to understand what this is, how do we navigate the change. So you talk about it being all about control. What does that mean?
So imagine you're going through your daily life and you're struggling and on edge with anxiety and worries, and just for whatever reason there's a loss of control. You don't feel like you're in charge. And one of the most primitive ways that you can gain control is actually through what you decide to put in and out of your body. So food, it's something everybody does. Everybody eats and sleeps. Happens to be that the food part happens to be the easiest thing to do. as far as the restriction or binging or purging or whatever. The challenge is these maladaptive coping strategies related to food lead to endorphin release and can become habit forming. And that's why it's really hard to break them. And once someone has developed disordered eating behavior and they find that it actually works to a degree in the short term, they lose sight of the long-term negative effects, which we'll get into, especially within sport, causing problems with performance and injury risk and all the above.
And how quickly does that habit forming addiction, for lack of better terms, happen?
I mean, it really depends on the person and how they tend to spread like wildfire among social groups. So if one person is finding that it's working for them, they're, especially in adolescence, the peers will pick it up. And within the athletic population, there's like a competition within the team for a drive for thinness. And like, oh yeah, well, that person lost this weight. I found that their times had increased or gotten better in the short term. Maybe I should be doing the same thing. And the logic is just completely lost. So it can happen really fast.
So let's talk about the performance barriers that happen. Once you go down this path and you think that you're getting some winning results, but then there's so much that's happening that is really going to affect us in so many ways. What are the performance barriers?
So it all comes down to a math equation. It's something called low energy availability, or LEA. For the longest time, there was this thing called unexpected underperformance syndrome, or UPS, or UUPS. Basically, if you're not getting in enough fuel and you're expending too much, not too much, just the amount of energy that you usually would do on the field, the ice, track, whatever, then you're going to end up degrading muscle tissue, protein, whatever. So there's actually a relatively new diagnosis that explains all of this, called relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S. So if you learn, again, nothing else other than the fact that eating disorders are about control within the athletic population, the most important disordered eating syndrome to learn about is RED-S. Used to be called the female athlete triad. A little bit loaded there because females tended to be the ones who people thought had eating disorders. And so the triad components were someone who's lost menses, amenorrhea, low bone mineral density, and then low energy availability, those three. Since we kind of woke up to the fact that it can also happen in men or in other genders, they cut out the amenorrhea as a requirement, and they kind of focused more on the math equation about low energy availability. So I don't want to like bore you, but what happens when someone's not fueling themselves? So say they're not taking in enough carbs, you got early glycogen depletion, which is basically like the ready fuel. And then you start burning the protein. You're not taking in enough protein, then you can start breaking down your muscle tissue. And then if you're dehydrated, you start having early fatigue. Put them all together, this is not a potion for a winning strategy, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. And certainly from a mental perspective, we're trying to get every advantage possible. And having that battle between our body being what we consider overweight and having a desire to lean up, what's the right way to do it?
So that's a really good question. So obviously we want to have in general, we want to have healthy messaging within a team or from a coach to the athlete about nutrition, and then the needs that are required for performance on field. So again, takes a village. Again, yet another theme. We're making sure everybody's aware of what's going on. The athlete.
Let's just start right there in terms of that positive message. What is an example of a positive message?
So ensuring that, okay, very easy way to do it. In a weight-based sport, so which they're quite common and have a very high prevalence rate of eating disorders, not weighing athletes in public where other folks are like, where you start to learn the numbers, or putting bulletin board material on what the person's weight is so that they can be compared to other athletes. Like, that is just bad practice, but it very much happens. It can happen in cheerleading, gymnastics, you name it, folks actually posting it. But also being aware of, like, say, rowing, which has a very high prevalence rate of eating disorders. There tends to be a math equation about how how much the coxswain can weigh and how that might then affect the boat. So the sharing of information, but doing it in a very almost in a healthy private way, it would be good. And if there is an issue, making sure you take the athlete to the side and have a conversation in a supportive way. Hey, like, I'm noticing that we're either not meeting our targets and the negative way or a positive way. What can we do to support you? Versus wagging the finger, all focus on performance. Performance at its core has to do with making sure you're also mentally fit in the background. So we want to take a little bit of a step back. The concept of sports psychology has been around since the 50s. Mental health in sport has really been a more recent conversation as we became more aware that mental health related concerns could actually be the indirect driver for the performance or deteriorating factor.
And so when we talk about having a healthy conversation, take us through what that is, because certainly if I'm gaining weight or I am, starting to worry from a weight perspective, the minute the coach says something to me or a family member or anybody with love, grace, great concern, I'm already concerned about it. I'm already noticing it, right? Like I'm already sensitive to it. How do we have that conversation?
Well, so athletes themselves are going to have their own typical set point when it comes to weight and phenotype and shape. We want to make sure that that matches the sport that they've picked. And so, for example, in a weight-based sport, if you can't fit a square peg into a round hole, if you're thinking about having someone compete at a much lower weight class, the idea of someone having to cut 15 to 20 pounds to make weight to be able to compete is crazy. Like it's so unsafe. The metabolic shifts are so unsafe. It's all fluid anyway. Then the person's going to be at much greater risk for injury. So starting off at the beginning, when you're talking to the young person about their interests and maybe thinking about, all right, well, who you are, does it fit this sport? Yeah. That would be the most important thing. Once they're there, if they, for example, you had a prepubertal athlete who hits puberty and then may no longer really fit, you might need to take them aside and be like, look, maybe we should be playing something else, or is there a way we can adapt your nutrition or whatever to match the sport?
Yeah, that's a little brutal in terms of if I want to do something that my body isn't really built for. So that's a hard truth to have from a dream perspective. If my parents have done it or all my friends are doing it and I want to do it and my body type just doesn't fit, that's a tough one. What about if my body type fits? I've been in the sport. Let's just say I'm a college athlete now. And just the stress and the strains of being a college athlete is moving me more towards some emotional eating that maybe I didn't do before this. And I'm just kind of hoping it doesn't catch up with me, or I'm hoping that by, managing all the working out we're doing, but it's more of a hope system than a factual system. How do we get some winning strategies for that emotional eating and making it factual?
So, I would like to think, again, hoping here, that the coaches and athletic trainers who are on the front lines are going to be aware that the athlete is struggling. So the emotional eating it would have a precursor, right? Likely higher stress level, higher anxiety, whatever. There is a way to screen your athletes for mental health symptoms that sometimes had been overlooked, recently developed by the International Olympic Committee. It's called the Sports Mental Health Assessment Tool. This can be deployed by any athletic trainer or any coach or whatever, just to see, is there something else going on? And if there is, if ticks up, then you can get them the help they need, and it actually helps triage to where they should go. But getting the person a counselor, life coach, whatever, to be able to work on some of these issues will then address what we're like that little tip of the iceberg, the part above it, which might be the emotional eating, versus it's actually much deeper.
And what about from a cortisol perspective, that emotional eating that starts happening and it almost feels out of control? What's going on with my body then?
Yeah, so well, you just nailed it. I mean, higher stress, higher cortisol, higher drive there. You have to figure out other healthy outlets, and especially for athletes, their primary outlet is what they enjoy doing, which is athletics. So when it goes the other way, and you have restrictive eating or over exercise, but the only thing that also settles their anxiety is exercise, it's a double whammy. So finding other non-sport related activities that can help sort of lower that stress is super important. So basically developing healthier coping strategies, which is exactly why you go to counseling.
And so what are some winning strategies for that?
So think about more idle activities that versus ones that require so much healthy movement. Um, I they're actually, if you go online, you can find 99 coping skills or
Mm,
whatever. There's different ones. I tend to like activities that aren't screen based.
yes,
So because we already have enough, and that's habit forming in and of itself.
right.
Reading a good book, knitting, keeping your hands busy, all the things that an occupational therapist would wish we would listen to them to do to
Yeah.
help with those sensory based needs is what we should be doing instead of focusing on maybe the athletic stuff that's getting us in trouble.
So let's talk about navigating through change because this is great information. All kinds of information swirling in my head about, okay, what do we do with all of this? So thank you just for the information, for educating us, for talking about the winning strategies for it. If we want to start with something right now in terms of understanding an eating disorder, whether we're pre and we're just wanting to make sure we're setting all of our people up for a healthy nutrition and healthy behavior, we're still in a world of great anxiety and great performance and social media. Oh, I mean, everything is very much body centered. Thoughts?
So I think it comes back to messaging and how people need to understand what an eating disorder is. It's an invisible injury. You have no idea who's walking outside right now that's struggling with an eating disorder. That's also the problem because you can't see it. A lot of people then don't realize that it actually occurs in general. So maybe reframing that and considering an eating disorder as either a metabolic injury, just like a physical injury, or like the tendonitis of a physical injury, and that it's just this lingering thing that needs to be addressed, otherwise it won't get better. So if you're communicating that way, people will take it more seriously when someone's struggling with disordered eating and maybe get help. The getting help part is actually easier than you think if you know that it's going on. So the biggest thing is education and screening. Once you recognize that an eating disorder might be going on, you can deploy the multidisciplinary team. All you got to do is figure out, hey, I'm going to go to my primary care doc, and then we'll unleash the psychologist, the dietitian, maybe the psychiatrist, the helping coach up the coach, the athletic trainer, and you have like end up being again a village to help this person. You also can figure out what level of care they may need because they might need to be just in the clinic and getting a little bit of nutritional support. They may be so sick that they need to go to the medical hospital or go to a specialized treatment facility. Within the field of athletics, there are actually a couple of really, really great resources out there that are athlete specific eating disorder recovery programs. One is the Victory program in St. Louis, used to be known as part of McCallum, and another is with ED Care here in Denver called the Athlete's Edge. Those work with athletes all over the nation. They can do telehealth. I mean, or just provide consultant work. And then there's a couple of great conferences, the Eating Disorder and Sport Conference that I like to attend that sometimes kind of bounces around. That's Riley Nichols Conference. And then the Female Athlete Conference run by Dr. Kate Ackerman out of Boston Children's. Resources are everywhere. You just need to know where to go. Probably the easiest one, though, for you to go to would be the National Eating Disorder Association's website and the NEDA website. And that'll give you facts, figures, places to look at, support groups, you name it.
So thank you very much for that. And we will make sure we have all of that listed for our team to be able to have as a resource. I want to talk about just my heart as a human and admitting that I have this going on. How do I navigate through the change to really own it and take responsibility and ask for help?
So that is the $1 million question. The person with the eating disorder usually is the last person to recognize that they have a problem because the eating disorder itself is not externalized within them. as it is in a treatment setting when we're working with a family to help think of it in an external way. It still is the person. The eating disorder is habit. It's a habit forming thing. It's become part of their identity. So trying to basically help the person remove their quote best friend or crutch or supportive whatever, or the only coping strategy that they think that works to dealing with this stress is very difficult. But the more education you provide with telling them, okay, here are the health consequences of you sticking with this, and also just letting you know from a prognosis perspective, after 18, it's much harder to get someone help because you lose leverage after they become an adult. It's much easier when they're a kid. So basically, if you're not someone who's from the treatment side, you're just a supportive friend or family or whatever.
Or
It's
coach.
just sticking with them. Being very gentle with saying we're worried about you. We've noticed that you either have not been eating enough or you've lost some weight or whatever, but we recognize that you think things are going on, but this has been going on for a while. Would you humor me and going to be seen at least medically to get evaluated? It might take 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 conversations, but if you actually care about the person, it's worth saving their life, because these are unfortunately very, very deadly illnesses, especially anorexia nervosa. But painting hope here, but treatable.
Yes.
They are very treatable. As long as you get the person help early, often, and focusing on nutrition food is medicine here.
You talk about something that's so powerful for all of our work, and that's identity management, really beginning to understand who we are and what we identify as, and really putting that pressure on ourselves. When you talk about food being somewhat a best friend or something that we identify with, meaning I'm thinking about my weight all the time, or I'm working out all the time, or, what do I do with that in terms of being able to choose healthy versus something that's actually working against me?
Yeah, that's such the importance of working with a dietitian to can remind you of how to create a healthy eating schedule. The Brits actually probably have the best way of doing it. They have their 6 little time slots, breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper, otherwise known as 3 big meals and 3 snacks or whatever. But it's throughout the day fueling of the body for what it needs versus I'm just going to skip breakfast, not the most important meal of the day. I might eat something afternoon, I'll eat a big dinner. That doesn't, you've basically put your body in starvation mode all day, and then you may have supplemented it. It might be actually the correct daily 24-hour number of calories, but you've missed the point. I think getting back to what you were saying as far as food being the support and the crutch and how to go about it, it's really helping that person become more flexible. Most folks with eating disorders tend to be very rigid, perfectionistic. In fact, a lot of athletes will have, there's a concept of wholesome exercise versus, disordered eating behaviors that can result, because the traits that make a good athlete can have a dark side, and then it becomes problematic, right?
Right. Well, I want to talk about really the new hope, the new thinking, and the new skills, how we can do all new to really be able to step into this challenge with open eyes and really recognize that exactly what makes us a great athlete or a very disciplined person, that ritual and routine, that ability to be disciplined, can turn against us if the stress gets the best of us, or social media, or something from a kind of outside source. What do you recommend to be very healthy internally, like myself? How do I empower myself to make the changes and to own the just the temptation of this? I mean, I really respect the power of team, and you talking about those of us on the outside being able to help somebody. I want to talk about it being about me now, in terms of me owning the power of, I'm recognizing that I'm struggling a bit with food or my body image, or I'm starting to make some unhealthy choices, and I don't want to. I've got every part of me knows the science, knows what's best, but I can't help this. I'm struggling.
So it's teaching the athlete early that, again, what's making them the good athlete that perfectionistic side can, if once you put under a little bit of stress, it can become problematic. So, for example, healthy exercise, the goal of it should be to challenge oneself, to become better. The flip side is you start to actually, if you're doing it no longer to challenge yourself, but you're using it as a way to alter your appearance or to address stress, but not in a good way, that's not good. If you're starting to, if you miss a practice and you're like, no, that's totally not a problem, but you start to get distressed from missing practice or a workout, that's an issue. If you're willing to modify your training if you get ill or injured, that's reasonable. If you're powering through an illness or an injury, that's a red flag. So just being more mindful of the role of exercise and kind of what you're doing on the field is important. You're committed to training, but then there can be an excessive side. Your perfectionistic qualities can be very good in many areas, but not when it comes to disordered eating.
Well, it brings us right back to that well-being. It's a word that everybody uses. I really value understanding that well-being is really being well for myself. And I value so much the education of understanding what should I be eating from a nutrition perspective. And thank you for just the vision of really all of me being for me in a big way. And really, am I exercising for the joy of exercising? Am I eating to really fuel my body? I love that, 6 meals a day rather than starving and purging. And everything's in somewhat of alignment and balance. And I know those are words that we speak of, and they're somewhat very intentional about getting all of this to kind of line up and to be for us and to be performing at the highest level. And you add stress to the mix, and no matter what my intentions have been, all of a sudden that worry and that fear and that anxiety can start to take over. And so I love that you are joining us and you are on our support team to really help get us coached up to win our well-being, to win our life. And we're going to unpack a lot of topics as we do this series. And team, we are for you, and let us know any of your questions about this. We'll be here to answer them. And thank you so much for just the well-being, the information, and navigating through change as we set ourselves up to win.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carla. I appreciate it.
Okay, team, it's up to you. Go out and really be curious about paying attention to your body, to your mind. Eat because you're for you, and be intentional about what are you putting in and how does it make you feel. Enjoy the power of exercising and how amazing our bodies are, the things they can do, and be intentional about being for you in every way. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.